The once united Al-Andalus had been broken into a small patchwork of Taifa kingdoms. Although these smaller states boosted cultural brilliance, their constant rivalries left them vulnerable. The Christian kingdoms in the north sensed this opportunity and grew bolder. They were just an inch closer to reclaiming the land that was long lost to Al-Andalus. Each Taifa was fighting hard to maintain its position. It had no choice but to hire mercenaries or form uneasy alliances to survive. However, this instability was not limited to external threats alone. Within the Taifa state, power struggles and short-lived ambitions weakened any hope of unity. Al-Andalus was now on the brink of collapse, and so during these critical moments, salvation came from the east across the sea. The North African Almoravids and later the Almohads promised to bring back order and resist the advances of Christians. Would these powers be the saviors Al-Andalus needed, or would they bring their own brand of dominance? The story of resurgence now begins. The Almoravids were a Berber dynasty from North Africa, which became a force defined by its strict adherence to Islamic principles and a commitment to religious reform. Their leader, Yusuf ibn Tashfin, was a visionary commander who sought to purify Islamic practices and establish a unified rule under the banner of faith and discipline. As the Taifa kingdoms of Al-Andalus crumbled under Christian advancement, desperate for salvation, some of these rulers looked beyond their borders. The threat posed by the northern Christian kingdoms was identifiable to the Taifa leaders, who sent pleas for help from the Almoravids. The turning point came in 1086 when Yusuf ibn Tashfin crossed the Strait of Gibraltar with his army to confront Alfonso VI of Castile at the Battle of Sagrillas. Almoravids killed Christian forces, weakening the expansion and giving a reprieve to Al-Andalus. This victory introduced a new era as Yusuf ibn Tashfin extended his dominance over the Taifa states and united them under his rule. Their existence in Al-Andalus brought in military power and stability, but soon Almoravids' strict regime and religious intolerance would clash with the diverse culture of Al-Andalus. Under their leadership, Christian reconquest was put on hold, but new questions arose. Could Almoravids truly combine with the complex society of Al-Andalus, or would their rigid approach plant seeds of conflict within the empire? The answer to these questions would soon unfold as their rule continued. Almoravids came with a tidal wave of reforms that changed the cultural and political face of the region. It was an age of promise in administrative centralization and religious conservatism. Leader Yusuf ibn Tashfin of Almoravid attempted to bring unity to a divided region through the replacement of the Taifa kingdom's dispersed form of government with a more orderly one. This would make governance in terms of religious reforms their hallmark. The Almoravids advocated for the strictest forms of Islam interpretation and enacted legislation along the lines of this reform agenda. This served to instill discipline but created friction with the more cosmopolitan, heterogeneous culture of Al-Andalus, stress that was also manifest in the unity that they tried to achieve. The Almoravids were powerful on the battlefield. They halted the Christian advance and secured strategic territories, thus ensuring the survival of Muslim rule in the region. They fortified Al-Andalus against external threats, creating a period of relative security. Economically, they brought stability and wealth due to the control of trade routes spanning North Africa to the Mediterranean. Commerce flourished anew in Córdoba and in other cities through their markets as goods from Africa, Europe, and Asia passed through these markets. Culturally, the stern rule, however, kept at bay certain artistic and intellectual pursuits in the initial stages. Instead, the assimilation and patronization of the very rich traditions of the region arrived much later due to integration into the Al-Andalus system. The Almoravids had established a basis for a united Al-Andalus, but their unyielding attitude furthered seeds of discontent. Indeed, their achievements were undeniable, but the question remains: could they successfully reconcile reform and the heterogeneity of the territory of which they now stood in charge, or would their rigidity ultimately prove to be a cause of their downfall? The Almohads mark a dramatic shift in the trajectory of Al-Andalus's history. A rival Berber movement that originated from the Atlas Mountains of North Africa, they were even more puritanical in their interpretation of Islam than the Almoravid leaders. They were motivated by an ideology that was based in religious moralism, and they preached a return to what they considered to be the unadulterated practices of the faith. In grabbing on to the fast-growing discontentment of the Almoravid rigid government, they laid down a significant oppressive military might by consuming the northern areas of Africa inhabited by the Almoravids and spreading all through Al-Andalus. Until the middle 12th century, the power of the world went to the account of the most powerful Muslim establishment during the reign of the Almohads. Once firmly in power, the Almohads then needed to enforce their reformist principles throughout Al-Andalus, that is, by applying stricter religious policies and reshaping the administration according to their ideology. Of course, this approach was stubborn, but it also brought a feeling of new order and stability to the region. Despite the stiffness, Almohads acknowledged that the benefits of culture and scientific contributions were highly valuable. The reign of Almohads marked the resurgence of intellectual activities in Seville and Córdoba. Scholars, poets, and scientists could find patrons within the Almohad courts, thereby triggering a new wave of rebirth, learning, and enriching the Al-Andalus legacy. In addition, the Almohads also invested in architecture, and their legacy can be seen in iconic structures like Seville's Giralda. Such emphasis on the revival of culture was a testament that even beyond the battlefield, the power resided in the minds and hearts of people. True and stiff policies on the part of their administration, combined with a growing Christians from the north, were what strongly brought pressures to bear against them. Which way would it be for this Almohads? Sustain and stand the test, or history winds change course, however? The Almoravids and Almohadic epochs feature great leaders plus crucial battles shaping the destiny of Al-Andalus. Among the most notorious is Yusuf ibn Tashfin, who was also one of the most effective Almoravid warlords in stopping the advance of Christians. The most notable achievement was in 1086 at the Battle of Sagrajas, where his men emerged victorious against the army of King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile. This served to momentarily check the Christian reconquest and cemented the authority of Almoravids in Al-Andalus. For his part, on the Almohad side, Abd al-Mu'min was quite a transformation figure. Being a devoted adherent of founder Ibn Tumat, he united the different Berber tribes into a force that could successfully conquer Almoravid territories, extending the dominion of Almohad across northern Africa up into Al-Andalus simultaneously. He thus laid the foundation for a new rule of centralized reform. During the period, some other battles took place that greatly contributed to the turbulent history of the region. With Sagrajas conquered, the Almoravids continued with a series of campaigns to cement their position not only against the Christian kingdoms, but also against the Taifa states, which turned rebellious. The Almohads had their share of battles, among them the ones they faced with the few remaining Almoravid loyalists and mounting Christian pressure from the north. These were not only military conflicts, but also marked the political and cultural turning point of Al-Andalus. The influence of personalities like Yusuf ibn Tashfin and Abd al-Mu'min, along with the fruit of their wars, paved the way for the final collapse of the Muslim rule in Iberia. Were the victories and the reforms enough to save their empires, or were they just reprieve of the inevitability of the tide of history? Not only conquest, but also impressive cultural gains were to be recorded in the Almohad era. Philosophy and science thrived under their leadership, especially with mighty figures such as Ibn Rushd. A philosopher, physician, and commentator, Ibn Rushd's works filled this gap between the Islamic thought system and classical Greek philosophy, largely influencing thinkers in Europe as well as across the Islamic world. His interpretations of Aristotle became a cornerstone of intellectual discourse in both Christian and Muslim territories. In terms of architecture, this period achieved new heights when landmarks were being built that can inspire awe still. The Giralda in Seville original minaret for the mosque is a beautiful example of how brilliant Almohad architects were. Elegant in design and intricate in detail, it was the synthesis between functionality and aesthetic expression during this period of ruling. The northern Christian kingdoms, with the successes they had gained in their previous engagements, continued to attack the Moors. Key milestones were at the 1212 Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, which battered the Almohad position on the throne. The battle broke the Almohads' military supremacy on the Iberian Peninsula, but marked the start of a decisive phase in the Christian Reconquista. Internally, the Almohads were plagued by rebellions and dissent across their vast dominions. Some factions became alienated by the rigid reformist principles, thus sparking uprisings that weakened their control even further. Constant pressure from outside forces strained resources and further eroded their grip on Al-Andalus. Cracks had now started to appear in their once so all-powerful empire and casting uncertainty about the future of Almohads. Were the legacy and splendor of their brilliant culture and intellect enough to fight back the wave of history, or was the golden era of Al-Andalus reaching its climax? Answers to these would seal their fate for 1,000 years and more. For a brief moment in history, Al-Andalus lived under the banners of the Almoravids and then the Almohads. Their tenure revitalized power, culture, and ingenuity, reminding the world of the genius that had long characterized this country. During their reign, the fragmented fragments of a splintered empire were reassembled, and the reconquest tide of the Christians pushed back, if only for a little while. But for how long could such tenuous unity endure? The reconquest wouldn't let up. Its troops remained continually on the increase every year, but what had appeared to be unbreakable control under the Almohads began to crack open in fissures. Could this rising tide of Christian ambition defeat Al-Andalus or forever reduce its glorious civilization to smoke and ash?